After restoring the photo, experts discovered what the enslaved girl held and why she never smiled. The cardboard box had been sitting in Margaret Thornton's attic in Richmond, Virginia for as long as anyone could remember. It was October 2023 when she finally decided to sort through her late grandmother's belongings, preparing the old Victorian house for sale. Inside the box, beneath yellowed letters and faded receipts, she found a small metal photograph so damaged it was almost unrecognizable. The tintype was covered in rust, its surface scratched and corroded by more than a century and a half of neglect. But even through the deterioration, one image remained hauntingly clear. A young girl's face, her eyes filled with such profound sadness that Margaret felt her breath catch. "Who is this child?" she whispered to herself, turning the photograph carefully in her hands. The metal was cool and rough, flaking slightly at the edges. There was no identification, no date, no name written on the back. Just that heartbreaking face staring out from the damaged surface. Margaret's grandmother had been a meticulous keeper of family records, but this photograph seemed separate from the family albums, hidden deliberately. Margaret noticed something else. In the girl's hand, barely visible through the rust and scratches, was what appeared to be a piece of paper or fabric. She couldn't tell what it was. She took a photograph of the tintype with her phone and posted it to a historical preservation forum online, asking if anyone could help identify the image or recommend restoration services. Within hours, her inbox filled with responses. One message stood out from Dr. Patricia Hayes, a specialist in Civil War-era photography at the University of Virginia. "This appears to be a significant historical artifact," Dr. Hayes wrote. "The clothing and photographic technique suggest early 1860s. If you're willing, I'd like to examine this in person. There may be more to this photograph than what's visible on the surface." Margaret agreed immediately. She had no idea that this decision would uncover one of the most heartbreaking stories of the Civil War era, hidden for 161 years in a child's grasp. Dr. Patricia Hayes stood in her laboratory at the University of Virginia, the damaged tintype positioned carefully under her high-resolution scanner. Beside her, Michael Rodriguez, a digital restoration specialist, adjusted the lighting and camera settings. They had been working together for 8 years, recovering lost details from thousands of historical photographs, but something about this image unsettled them both. "The deterioration is severe," Michael observed, studying the monitor as the first scans appeared. "Rust has eaten through at least 40% of the emulsion. But look at her face. Even through all this damage, that expression is so clear." Dr. Hayes leaned closer to the screen. The girl's eyes seemed to look directly at her across the decades, conveying a depth of sorrow that transcended the physical limitations of the photograph. She couldn't have been more than 9 or 10 years old. Children in that era usually showed curiosity or nervousness when photographed, but this child looks broken. They began the painstaking process of digital restoration. Using specialized software, Michael isolated different layers of damage, carefully removing rust stains, filling in scratched areas with data from surrounding pixels, and gradually reconstructing what the original image might have shown. It was delicate work, requiring artistic judgment as much as technical skill. After 6 hours of work, the girl's face emerged with startling clarity. Her features were delicate but drawn, her cheeks hollow from inadequate nutrition. Her hair had been pulled back severely, so tight it must have been painful. The simple dress she wore was made of the cheapest cotton, with visible patches on the shoulders, but it was her hands that captured Dr. Hayes' attention. "Michael, can you enhance this area?" she asked, pointing to the lower right portion of the screen. "There's something in her hand. I can't tell what it is, but she's gripping it tightly." Michael adjusted the contrast and sharpness, using algorithmic reconstruction to fill in areas where the metal plate had corroded completely. Slowly, gradually, a rectangular shape began to emerge. It was paper, definitely paper, with what appeared to be handwriting on it. "Can you make out any words?" Dr. Hayes asked, her voice tense with anticipation. "Not yet, but give me another few hours. If there's text there, I'll find it." It was nearly midnight when Michael called Dr. Hayes back to the laboratory. She had been at home, unable to sleep, thinking about that child's face. She arrived within 20 minutes, still wearing her house slippers, to find Michael staring at his monitor with an expression she had never seen before, a mixture of triumph and profound sadness. "I got it," he said quietly. "I can read what's on the paper." The restored image on the screen was remarkable. Where there had been only rust-colored blur, now crisp details emerged. The paper in the girl's hand was a legal document, slightly crumpled as if it had been handled many times, and across the top, in the ornate handwriting of the 1860s, were words that made Dr. Hayes' stomach turn. "Bill of sale." Below that, more text became visible as Michael continued enhancing the image. One Negro girl, named Sarah, aged approximately 9 years, sound of body and mind, sold this day of August 14th, 1862 for the sum of $400. The document continued, but Dr. Hayes had to look away, her hand covering her mouth. "Oh, God," she whispered. "She's holding her own bill of sale. The document that—" She couldn't finish the sentence. Michael's voice was thick with emotion. "There's more. Look at the signature at the bottom." Dr. Hayes forced herself to look back at the screen. In the lower portion of the document, 2 signatures were visible. The seller's name, which read Robert Thornton, and the buyer's name, partially obscured, but ending in Field. Thornton, Dr. Hayes said slowly. Margaret Thornton brought us this photograph. This Robert Thornton might be her ancestor. He sold this child. They sat in silence, the weight of that realization settling over them. The photograph wasn't just a random artifact from an estate sale. It was a family document, kept for generations, showing a child who had been treated as property by Margaret's own ancestors. But why had Sarah been photographed holding this document? And why did she look so devastated? The answers lay in tracing the bill of sale back to its origin and discovering what had happened on August 14, 1862 that led to this heartbreaking image. We need to find out who she was, Dr. Hayes said finally. Sarah deserves to be more than just a face in a photograph. Dr. Hayes contacted Margaret Thornton the next morning, her conversation careful and sensitive. She explained what they had discovered in the restoration, that the document in the girl's hand was a bill of sale and that the seller's name matched Margaret's family name. There was a long silence on the phone. My family owned slaves, Margaret said quietly. It wasn't a question. I knew the house was built in 1840, and I knew Virginia's history, but I never imagined having something like this, physical evidence of a child being sold. I understand this is difficult, Dr. Hayes replied. But if you're willing, your family records might help us identify Sarah and understand her story. The photograph was kept in your grandmother's belongings for a reason. Margaret agreed immediately. 2 days later, Dr. Hayes sat in the Thornton House's library surrounded by boxes of documents, ledgers, letters, property deeds, and plantation records dating back to the 1820s. The house itself felt oppressive with history, its elegant rooms built on the suffering of people like Sarah. She found the plantation ledger for 1862 within an hour. Robert Thornton had maintained meticulous records of his property, listing 32 enslaved people by name, age, and assigned value. On a page dated July 1862, she found an entry that made her pause. Sarah, daughter of Ruth, age 9, house servant valued at $450. The next page showed the transaction. August 14, 1862. Sarah sold to James Hadfield of Lynchburg for $400. Buyer required immediate transfer. Mother Ruth remains property of this estate. Dr. Hayes read the words 3 times, feeling sick. Sarah had been separated from her mother. That's what the photograph captured. Not just the sale of a child, but the moment of family destruction. At 9 years old, Sarah had been torn from the only person she had in the world. She continued searching and found letters from Ruth tucked into the back of the ledger. They were written in a careful, educated hand. Ruth had somehow learned to write, a dangerous skill for enslaved people. The letters were pleas to Robert Thornton, begging to know where her daughter had been taken, asking if she could send messages, offering to work harder if only she could see Sarah again. The responses, if there were any, had not been kept. But the letters themselves told the story. A mother's desperate love, ignored and dismissed. Tracing James Hadfield proved more challenging. Dr. Hayes traveled to Lynchburg, Virginia, where the city's historical society maintained records from the Civil War period. The librarian, an elderly man named Thomas Green, who had spent 40 years studying local history, listened intently as she explained what she was searching for. Hadfield, he repeated, typing the name into the archive database. Yes, I know that name. James Hadfield was a tobacco merchant, quite wealthy. He bought and sold extensively during the war years, made a fortune supplying Confederate forces. He paused, his expression darkening. He also dealt in human trafficking, though, of course, they didn't call it that then. The computer screen filled with records. Hadfield had purchased 17 enslaved people between 1860 and 1864, most of them children between the ages of 8 and 14. The pattern was disturbing and specific. Why children? Dr. Hayes asked, though she dreaded the answer. Thomas pulled up a newspaper advertisement from 1863. Hadfield ran what he called an apprenticeship service. He bought enslaved children, claiming he would teach them valuable skills, then lease them out to factories, workshops, and wealthy households. It was profitable because children were cheaper to purchase than adults, and he could charge monthly fees for their labor while keeping them in his custody. Dr. Hayes felt anger rising in her chest. So Sarah was bought not to work for Hadfield directly, but to be leased out to others? Most likely, Thomas confirmed. He pulled up another document, a ledger from Hadfield's business showing monthly transactions. In September 1862, 1 month after Sarah's purchase, there was an entry. Girl Sarah, age 9, placed with Manning household for domestic service. Monthly fee, $8. The Manning household. Another name to trace, another link in the chain of Sarah's suffering. But Dr. Hayes noticed something else in the ledger. A photograph order dated August 15, 1862, 1 day after Sarah's purchase. J. Sullivan, photographer, 1 tintype portrait of Girl Sarah with documentation. The entry read, cost $2. The photograph had been commissioned by Hadfield himself. But why? And why had he required Sarah to hold her bill of sale in the image? This wasn't just a portrait, Dr. Hayes realized aloud. This was documentation for his business records. Proof of ownership. Thomas nodded grimly. And proof of what he'd paid for her, in case of disputes or resale. Sarah hadn't been photographed as a person. She'd been photographed as merchandise, holding the receipt that proved she was property. That's why she never smiled. She understood exactly what was happening. The Manning family of Lynchburg had been prominent industrialists, owning a textile mill that supplied fabric to Confederate uniforms. Their estate records, preserved in the Virginia Historical Society, showed a household that employed both paid servants and leased enslaved labor. In October 1862, their household ledger showed the addition of girl Sarah on lease from J. Hadfield for kitchen and nursery duties. Dr. Hayes found something else in those records, a diary kept by Catherine Manning, the 17-year-old daughter of the household. Unlike her parents' business-focused correspondence, Catherine's diary contained personal observations about daily life. The entry for September 10, 1862, made Dr. Hayes sit up straight. A new girl has come to help mother with the little ones. Her name is Sarah, though she will not speak it herself or answer to it. She is very young, perhaps my brother Edward's age, but there is no childhood in her eyes. She works silently, efficiently, but I have never seen her smile. Not once. I asked her today why she looks so sad, and she showed me a paper she keeps folded in her apron pocket. I could not read all of it, but I saw it was some kind of sale document. When I asked about it, her eyes filled with tears, but still she did not speak. Mother scolded me for bothering the help and told me to leave the girl alone. Later entries mentioned Sarah periodically. Catherine seemed fascinated by and sympathetic to the silent child working in her home, though she clearly didn't understand the full weight of what Sarah had endured. In November 1862, Catherine wrote, "Sarah still carries that paper everywhere. I saw her reading it tonight when she thought no one was watching. She was crying, very quietly so no one would hear. I think it must be about her family. I wish I could help her, but I don't know how." In January 1863, the entries stopped mentioning Sarah. Instead, there was this: "The girl Sarah has been returned to Mr. Hadfield. Mother said she was unsuitable because she would not stop crying at night and disturb the household. Father complained about the wasted lease money. Returned like defective merchandise." Dr. Hayes closed the diary, her hands shaking with anger. Sarah had been 9 years old, torn from her mother, leased out to strangers, and when her grief became inconvenient, she was simply sent back. And through it all, she'd clung to that bill of sale, and the only document that connected her to her previous life, to the plantation where her mother remained. But what happened to Sarah after January 1863? The trail went cold. Dr. Hayes needed to find Hadfield's records for that year. Finding Hadfield's 1863 records required a trip to the National Archives in Washington, D.C. There, in the Freedmen's Bureau records from after the Civil War, Dr. Hayes finally found what she was looking for, but not in the way she expected. The Freedmen's Bureau had been established in 1865 to help formerly enslaved people transition to freedom. Among their records were testimonies from thousands of people searching for lost family members, trying to reconstruct connections torn apart by slavery. In a ledger dated November 1865, Dr. Hayes found this entry: "Ruth, formerly property of R. Thornton Estate, Richmond, seeks information regarding her daughter Sarah. Sold August 1862 to James Hadfield of Lynchburg. Girl would now be approximately 12 years old. Mother wishes to reunite with child. Any information to be directed to Freedmen's Bureau, Richmond office." Ruth had survived the war and immediately began searching for her daughter. Dr. Hayes found 3 more similar entries over the next year, each one a heartbreaking plea for information. But there was no record of a response, no indication that Sarah was ever found. She shifted her search to Hadfield's wartime records. What she discovered was devastating. In April 1863, Union forces had raided several Confederate supply operations in central Virginia. Hadfield's business warehouse had been among the targets. In the chaos of the raid, a fire broke out. The warehouse, which also served as housing for the children Hadfield kept in his custody, burned to the ground. A Confederate newspaper report from April 18, 1863, mentioned the incident. The fire at the Hadfield warehouse claimed the lives of 3 Negro children who were unable to escape the flame. Several others sustained injuries. The financial loss to Mr. Hadfield's enterprise is estimated at $5,000. 3 children. The article didn't name them. They weren't considered important enough to name. Dr. Hayes searched through every record she could find from that period, looking for evidence that Sarah had survived. She found Hadfield's insurance claim, which listed losses including 3 chattel slaves, combined value $200. But she also found something else, a Freedmen's Bureau report from 1866, compiled by an agent named Daniel Pierce, who had interviewed survivors of Hadfield's apprenticeship service. One testimony stood out. Spoke with a girl named Eliza, age 13, formerly held by Hadfield. She reports that in April 1863, during the warehouse fire, a girl called Sarah, approximately 10 years old, escaped through a back window. Sarah was seen running toward the river, still carrying a paper document she always kept with her. Eliza does not know if Sarah survived or where she went. Sarah had escaped. Dr. Hayes felt hope surge through her. But where had a 10-year-old child gone, alone in the middle of a war? The trail went cold again. Dr. Hayes returned to Richmond with renewed determination. If Sarah had escaped, she might have tried to return to the only place she knew, the Thornton plantation where her mother remained. It was a desperate hope, But Dr. Hayes had seen enough stories of enslaved people traveling hundreds of miles to reunite with family. She contacted local historians and genealogists who specialized in tracing African American families through the chaos of the Civil War period. One of them, an elderly woman named Mrs. Dorothy Freeman, had spent decades helping descendants find their ancestors. A child named Sarah, trying to get back to her mother in Richmond in 1863, Mrs. Freeman repeated thoughtfully, that would have been dangerous. Richmond was under siege, Confederate forces everywhere, and a black child traveling alone would have been captured immediately if seen on the roads. But Mrs. Freeman had resources Dr. Hayes didn't, connections to church records and oral histories passed down through families. She made several phone calls and 3 days later called Dr. Hayes with news. There's a church in Jackson Ward, the historic black neighborhood in Richmond. The records from the 1860s mention a girl who appeared there in May 1863 alone, asking for help finding someone named Ruth at the Thornton plantation. The church members hid her because she was technically still considered property and could be recaptured. They tried to locate her mother. Dr. Hayes drove to First African Baptist Church the next morning. The pastor, Reverend Marcus Johnson, led her to a climate-controlled room where the church's oldest records were preserved. In a journal dated May 1863, kept by a church elder named Samuel Wright, she found this entry. A child came to us today, no more than 10 years, starving and exhausted. She had walked for 3 weeks from Lynchburg, hiding during the day, traveling at night. She carried a piece of paper, a bill of sale, that showed she had been sold from the Thornton estate. She begged us to help her find her mother, Ruth. We sent word to the Thornton plantation, but received no reply. The child will not speak except to ask for her mother. She weeps constantly and will not be parted from that paper, which she says is the only proof of who she is and where she came from. Dr. Hayes read through more entries, her heart pounding. The church had sheltered Sarah for 3 months trying to locate Ruth. Finally, in August 1863, they received devastating news. The journal entry from August 12, 1863, was written in a different hand, more hurried and emotional than the previous entries. Word came today from the Thornton plantation. Ruth has died. The overseer reported she fell ill in July and passed within days. We do not know how to tell the child. She has already endured so much. Brother Samuel believes we must tell her the truth, that she deserves to know. I fear it will break what little spirit remains in her. Dr. Hayes had to stop reading, tears blurring her vision. Sarah had survived being sold, survived the warehouse fire, survived a 3-week journey on foot through a war zone, all to get back to her mother, and she had been too late. The next entry, dated August 14th, 1863, exactly 1 year after Sarah had been sold, read, "We told Sarah today about her mother. She did not cry, she did not speak. She simply sat with that paper in her hands, staring at it. Sister Margaret says the child has retreated into herself completely. We fear for her mind and spirit. She is welcome to stay with the church family, but she seems to be slipping away from us." The entries continued sporadically. Church members took turns caring for Sarah, who remained largely silent. She attended services, helped with simple tasks, but never smiled, rarely spoke, and never let go of her bill of sale. The document had become her entire identity, proof that she had been someone's daughter, that she had belonged somewhere, that her suffering had a cause and a name. In November 1863, the journal showed a change. The child Sarah has begun to speak again. She asks questions about reading and writing. Sister Margaret has agreed to teach her, though it must be done in secret as the laws still forbid it. Perhaps education will give her purpose. Florida ends. Over the following months, Sarah learned to read and write. By 1864, she was helping younger children in the church community with their lessons. When Richmond fell to Union forces in April 1865 and slavery ended, Sarah was 12 years old and free by law, though Dr. Hayes understood that no document could undo the trauma she had endured. The final entry about Sarah, dated June 1865, read, "Sarah has decided to keep the name given to her by her mother. She will no longer be defined by that paper she carries, but by who she chooses to become. She is asked to help with the Freedmen's Bureau, using her literacy to assist others searching for lost family. Despite everything she has suffered, she has found a way to help others find what she could not. Reunion." Dr. Hayes' research didn't end with those church records. Working with Mrs. Freeman and the Richmond historical community, she traced Sarah's life forward through Freedmen's Bureau records, census data, and church registries. What emerged was a remarkable story of survival and purpose. Sarah worked with the Freedmen's Bureau for 3 years, helping dozens of formerly enslaved people navigate the complex bureaucracy of searching for lost family members. She understood their pain intimately and could read the hope and despair in their faces because she had lived it herself. In 1868, she married a carpenter named Joseph Freeman and took his name, finally shedding the last connection to the Thornton estate. They had 4 children, all of whom Sarah taught to read before they were 5 years old, but Sarah never threw away her bill of sale. According to family stories passed down through generations, she kept it in a small wooden box, and once a year, on August 14th, the anniversary of her sale, she would take it out and read it to her children and grandchildren, not to traumatize them, but to teach them. "This paper tried to say I was worth $400, she would tell them, "but I am worth everything. I am worth my mother's love. I'm worth my freedom. I'm worth my voice. Never let anyone tell you what you're worth. Oh, Sarah lived until 1921, passing away at the age of 68. She had 17 grandchildren and saw the beginning of the Great Migration when her children and grandchildren moved north seeking better opportunities. Her legacy lived on not just through her descendants, but through the hundreds of people she had helped reunite with their families in those crucial years after the war. Dr. Hayes organized an exhibition at the University of Virginia in March 2024. The restored photograph was displayed alongside Sarah's bill of sale, which had been preserved by her descendants and donated to the museum, and the church journals that documented her journey. But the centerpiece of the exhibition was a large portrait painted by a contemporary artist, showing Sarah as she might have looked as an adult, strong, dignified, smiling. On opening day, 43 of Sarah's descendants attended, representing 5 generations. Among them was Margaret Thornton, who had donated the original photograph and contributed funds to establish a scholarship in Sarah's name for students studying African American history. James Freeman, Sarah's great-great-grandson and a retired teacher, spoke to the gathered crowd. My ancestor never smiled in that photograph because she knew exactly what was happening to her. She understood that she was being documented as property, that her humanity was being stripped away, but she survived. She reclaimed her voice, her name, her worth, and she made sure that no one in our family would ever forget what she endured or what she overcame. That photograph tried to define her as merchandise, but we define her as a hero. The exhibition included an interactive element. Visitors could submit names of their own ancestors to a searchable database that Dr. Hayes and her team were building, helping connect descendants of enslaved people with historical records. In the first month alone, 27 families found new information about lost ancestors. The restored photograph of Sarah hangs now in the National Museum of African American History and Culture in Washington, D.C., not far from where the Freedmen's Bureau once operated. Beside it is a placard that reads, Sarah Freeman, c. 1853-1921, sold at age 9, survived, reunited families, taught generations, never forgot, never surrendered. And beneath the photograph is a quote from Sarah herself, taken from a letter she wrote in 1870 to a woman searching for her daughter. I know your pain because I lived it. I carried that paper every day because it was proof I existed, proof I had been someone's child. Now I carry the memory of my mother's love instead. That is worth more than all the papers in the world. Do not give up. Love is stronger than the documents that tried to divide us. The photograph that once showed a heartbroken child holding proof of her dehumanization now stands as a testament to resilience, to the indestructible power of love and memory, and to one woman's refusal to let trauma define her. Sarah never smiled in that photograph, but she smiled for the rest of her life, teaching her children that their worth could never be written on paper by anyone else. Her story, hidden for 161 years in a deteriorated tintype, was finally complete.